May Jesus be praised, and onward with Mary. A good and holy day to all of you, dear children, in the sacred hearts of Jesus and Mary, and in the most chaste heart of Saint Joseph. Welcome back to our morning feature, Saints and Coffee. Today is Wednesday, the 2nd of April, the 4th week of Lent, and the liturgical memorial, the liturgical commemoration of that great saint. From Calabria, where St. Francis of Paola, founder of the Minims, the great thaumaturge, came from, he worked miracles. Not a day went by without him performing, not just one, but sometimes even several miracles. He had created an ointment, it's not quite clear where he got it from, with which he healed the sick and freed the possessed. And then he was a great preacher, not only in Calabria, but his holiness reached all the way to the court of Francis, where he was summoned by the king so he could see him in person. Just imagine that. He lived in the 15th century in Paola, there in Calabria, in the province of Cosenza, where the order he founded still exists, now spread throughout the world, and where the places connected to the saint's life are found. We invoke him not only for the small remnant of Calabria whom we will meet on Sunday, but for all the faithful of the small remnant around the world. St. Francis of Paola, a great light in the Church, straddling the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance. May he intercede for us from heaven, however, especially today, with all due respect to St. Francis of Paola, who certainly does not suffer from this in heaven. We remember with joy and emotion the 20th anniversary of the birth into heaven of the Magnus, Giovanni. John Paul II, Caro Wojtyła. We want to remember him as the Pope, who devoted himself entirely to the good of the Church, who worked tirelessly and consistently for the unity of the Church, and to lead the Church, as we shall now see, into the 3rd millennium. John Paul II. It was the 2nd of April, like today, a day similar to this one, where I am in terms of the weather. 2nd of April 2005, and at 9:37 p.m., the substitute for the Secretariat of State, Monsignor Santità from Argentina, announced that the Pope had died. He had wanted to ask Sister Tobiana. Now everyone claims the last statement of John Paul II as their own, including the Secretary. They all do it. Out of love for the Pope, of course. Another person, but it was Sister Tobiana who gathered the last words of John Paul II. Let me go to God, let me go to the Lord. He had lived through the agony of those final days. As we all remember, at least I remember it very clearly, I belong to the generation of John Paul II. He had spent the final days of his life lying in bed, praying. He had done the way of the cross. He would die. On Saturday, the 2nd of April, he had done the way of the cross, and he had also celebrated the Mass of Divine Mercy with deep emotion. And then, his personal secretary would also pray the Liturgy of the Hours for him, which he break time would listen to. Then, with a faint voice, he had also asked, while the death rattle was already upon him, that they read him the Passion of Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, well, this was John Paul II, who seemed for a moment, but only for a moment, of course, don't get me wrong, that the Church had come to a standstill with him. For a few moments, it seemed that with the announcement of the death of John Paul II, something of the Church also died. I don't know. That's how it seemed. Then, of course, thank God, shortly thereafter, 17 days after the death of Wojtyła, on the 19th of April 2005, Cardinal Ratzinger appeared on the loggia of St. Peter. Under the name of Benedict XVI, humble worker in the Lord's vineyard, the friend, the colleague, the collaborator of Wojtyła, the one whom as you know, called together with John Paul II, the two witnesses of the Lamb. We invoke him for Calabria's remnant on Sunday, and for all the faithful, a beacon in St. Francis of Paola, bridging the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. To him, of course, to John Paul II, to honor his memory. I would like to tell the confrere that we have the opportunity to mention him during Mass, if it has not yet been celebrated. Of course, we have to say 3 prayers. The liturgical feast has been set, as I believe you know, on the 22nd of October, the day on which Peter began his ministry. However, nothing prevents us from remembering him today. In the meantime, today is Wednesday, so I remind you that this evening on Lupus in Fabula, there is the lecture on the family by Don Enrico. Why do I say Lupus in Fabula? Because when it comes to the Church's teaching on the family, who explored and developed it in depth, if not him? John Paul II can undoubtedly be called the Pope of the family. So then, this series of catechesis has proven, right from the very first episode, just a single episode, to be interesting. And so I'll see you this evening with Father Enrico. Here is the post. Please share it, share it, share it. I strongly recommend that you do not miss this series of catechesis, because there is a lot of confusion with the pseudo-church, the false church of the false Pope Bergoglio. The scandalous news is recent, in my opinion. I'm shocked that Cardinal Fernandez, who isn't even a cardinal, the prefect of the Congregation for the Beating of the Faith, said that in certain cases, a sex change can be legitimate. We've reached that point, my dear friends. Among other things, within human dignity lies the intention to affirm that human freedom is unlimited. No, human freedom is by no means unlimited. Here there is a change. I would say it's an epochal shift in 2,000-year-old Christian theology. Be on your guard. So following this series of catechesis on the family is very important, this evening at 9 o'clock. But then I also remind you that at 6:30 this evening, I will pray the Holy Rosary, also showing images of John Paul II. We want to remember him precisely as our point of reference, the Pope, as we will now see, of the Totus Tuus. So at 6:30 p.m., there it is, the post. We will pray together. I will lead the Holy Rosary. Share it, share it, share it. On the YouTube channel of Radio Domina Nostra, where I invite you to give likes, which are very important, and to share the programming of Radio Domina Nostra. Subscribe, by the way, if you haven't done so yet. We're getting ready for the final meetings of mine and Fra Celestino's next Saturday, the 5th of April. At 4:30 in the afternoon, we'll be in Puglia, in Bari, at the Hotel Majesty. There it is, that's the place, at 4:30. Take heart, little one, I remain from Apulia. Do not miss this appointment, even though Apulia is long. If you can, make sacrifices even from Salento. Come, come, let us exchange Easter greetings, embrace one another, and bid farewell in the Lord, just as we have done at all the other gatherings that were so deeply attended. I often ask when I say this, but unfortunately, to the control rooms which alternate over the centuries and millennia to broadcast the images of the gatherings, but evidently Don Minutella. And then on Sunday, the 6th of April, we'll be in Lamezia Terme, the meeting in Calabria, again at 4:30 in the afternoon for the first Sunday of Passion in Piazza Lamezia at the Grand Hotel, Lamezia. Here too, courage, small Calabrian remnant. It's an opportunity to say goodbye and to exchange Easter wishes. Monday, tomorrow, the 7th of April, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the meeting with the small remnant of Eastern Sicily in Catania at the Hotel Garden in San Giovanni La Punta. These are the last 3 meetings, but I also remind you that we are approaching the rites of Holy Week. So once again, let us recall the appointments between Celestino and myself. We will be in Sicily for all the rites of the week. Saint at Little Nazareth. Father Ioannis will be in the north. On Palm Sunday, he will celebrate in Bergamo. Holy Monday, Holy Tuesday, and Holy Wednesday, with ample opportunity for confessions at home. Betania in Savigliano. On Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, Holy Saturday with the Vigil, and Easter Sunday returns to Bergamo. This is the intense program. We thank Father Ioannis from the same Fame Father. Don Ramon will be in Turin on Maundy Thursday, so not in Savigliano, but in Turin. Holiness and coffee. We anticipated a significant turnout of the faithful, since it was Holy Thursday, and therefore in Turin, not in Savigliano. On Good Friday, it moves to the other side of the Alps, to Asolo in the province of Treviso, for the adoration and liturgy of the cross. On Holy Saturday, accompanied by the Vigil and Easter observances, it makes its return to Tuscany. Father Pavel will be widely available for confessions throughout Holy Week, from Palm Sunday, on Monday, Tuesday, and Holy Wednesday. And then again during the Easter Triduum, until Easter Sunday morning, he will be in Rome. Take advantage, dear faithful, of the little time left in Lazio and Rome, so as not to miss these moments of grace that we priests of the sodality offer. We are just trying to assist as best we can. To all of you, and for this reason, for example, Father Pavel, in the afternoon at 5 o'clock, he will go to celebrate in Naples. Don Enrico, on the other hand, is present for all the rites of the week. Saint in Apulia, I remind you to support the project because we are trying to balance the accounts. Regarding the expenses, about the seminar, a holy cure of Ars, the lives of the nuns, quite a few of us, priests, and then again the apostolic journeys, Little Nazareth, with the construction of the more permanent gazebo where we will celebrate the rites of Holy Week. There are scattered expenses involved. Anyway, those are listed in the description. Libani, postal current account, the Pope. I invite you to keep them in mind. I thank all those who during this period, discreetly, yet consistently, they never fail to offer their support. Clearly, they realize that this is how they help our project move forward. Hail Jesus Christ, on with Mary. Today is the 2nd of April, as we mentioned at the beginning. We remember the 20th anniversary of the Dies Natalis, the birth into heaven of John Paul II, Magnus, which means great. It is a title that has been given to only a few people, just a couple of popes over the centuries. And without a doubt, John Paul II would deserve it, would deserve to have this title. This title, that is, means great. Magnus means great. And the holy people of God have always, in certain cases, felt the need to bestow this title. Here are figures in the Church of Holiness of that specific pope. I particularly remember Leo the Great and Gregory the Great. We all remember the moments of Pope John Paul II's funeral, when more than 1.5 million people, perhaps even 2 million, reached Rome. No pope has ever drawn such numbers. The Pope died at 2137 on the 2nd of April, and then there was the funeral, when, if you remember, the book of the Gospel was closed on the coffin of the great pontiff of Mary. Totally yours. Summarizing the life and message of John Paul II is no easy task. In my books here and there, I talk about him. In particular, I devote considerable attention to John Paul II in the book Church, Where Are You Going?, in the section dedicated to the post-council popes. The book is always available if you like. I devote considerable attention to his figure, his role, his message, his governance, and about John Paul II. This morning, while preparing my reflection, I thought of identifying 8 points that highlight the greatness of the papacy of John Paul II. But before telling you the 8 points I identified, let's start by giving a couple of facts for those who belong to a later generation. And coming up next are Radio Domina Nostra and Saints and Coffee. John Paul II was the 264th Pope of the Catholic Church. His baptismal name was Karol Józef Wojtyła. He was born in Wadowice, in the province of Krakow, on the 18th of May 1920. He was ordained deacon on the 20th of October 1946 by Cardinal Adam Stefan Papi. He was ordained priest on the 1st of November. In 1946, again by the same cardinal, and then it was an incredible race. Towards the episcopate, the cardinalate, and the papacy in record time. Just think, he became a bishop, though that was something that used to happen in Eastern Europe, at 38 years old. It's actually incredible, 38 years old. At the age of 38, on the 28th of September, in the year 1958, he was consecrated auxiliary bishop of Krakow by Archbishop Eugeniusz Baziak. On the 13th of January, 1964, then just 6 years after becoming auxiliary bishop, he became Archbishop of Krakow, the most important Polish see along with Warsaw. For this reason, on the 26th of June, 1967, he was made a cardinal by Paul VI. He will become Pope. He will be elected Pope on the 16th of October, 1978, at the age of 58. Here too, a rather young age, not entirely young, but compared to other pontiffs and their election, John Paul II is one of the youngest popes in history. Obviously, this is truly the modern papacy. We all remember not only today, the 2nd of April 2005, but also the 16th of October 1978, when the white smoke announced the election of the Pope and Cardinal Felici said, "Habemus Papam," and named him. Kel, Wojtyła, God, there was a general sense of embarrassment. In St. Peter's Square, those were the first steps of the journey towards globalization, towards the internationalization of the Church and of the hierarchy. And so there was talk then of an African Pope, because the surname made one think of something like Africa Wojtyła. And instead, here comes this athlete of God, this mighty giant of Mary, this unstoppable bulldozer of faith, with those breathtaking gestures, right from the very start, if you will, you'll all remember them. Truly emblematic, remarkably charismatic, and simply unforgettable. He begins by saying, "Praised be Jesus Christ." And here the Lord's cardinals have called upon one of their confreres from a distant country. It had been more than 400 years since a non-Italian pope had been elected. This too broke a protocol that had seemed unbreakable. And with that still slightly hesitant Italian, even though he had mastered it, the Pope immediately won the hearts of the people. If by any chance I am mistaken, please, break time, do correct me. On the 22nd of October, the inauguration with that famous homily, famed in Calabria, he was summoned by King Francis. Yes, now my heart is moved and I'll struggle to hold back the emotion, because I am, let's say, Italian. By antonomasia, and John Paul II pronounced those most famous words that have gone down in history and still echo around the world today. Open, indeed throw wide the doors. To Christ, do not be afraid. Thus began the adventure of John Paul II. His motto, the motto of John Paul II. It was a yellow cross with a blue background to represent the Madonna, and the letter M at the foot of the cross to signify Mary. And here we already see the Marian connotation of the pontificate of John Paul II. And the motto was, break time point 6, as is well known, familiar to everyone. Totus tuus, absolutely all yours, Mary. These are the essential facts. He will remain Pope, as we know, until the 2nd of April. 2005, so for quite a few years. First non-Italian Pope, exactly 26 years, 5 months and 17 days. And it was the 3rd longest pontificate ever. After that of Pius IX, which was the longest pontificate, and the one traditionally attributed to St. Peter the Apostle. He, John Paul II, as we'll see in a moment, would be known above all for being a pilgrim in the world. He undertook a total of 104 journeys across the globe, drawing crowds that were immense, enormous. Among the largest ever gathered, not only for religious events, but also for musical festivals, etc. Let us remember that on the World Youth Day in Rome, perhaps one of the most significant events, John Paul II, he was able to gather in Rome at Tor Vergata around 2 million faithful. They say young people, but they weren't only young people anyway, mostly yes. It was a moment of grace. Unforgettable. Now I'll tell you what I believe are the 8 most significant points of the pontificate. I've thought about it, I've reflected on it. I don't claim these are the only ones, or that they're exactly the right ones. You decide. I'm speaking especially to my fellow priests. I'll read them, then we'll go over them briefly. So then the merits of John Paul II, Magnus. First, leading the Church into the 3rd millennium, the Jubilee. Secondly, having diligently worked and acted towards the collapse of the communist bloc, thereby averting a nuclear war and preventing the clash of the Cold War. The 3rd merit was being a champion of non-negotiable values. First and foremost, the family. the Pope of the family, without a doubt, the tireless defender of life from its natural beginning. At its natural end, therefore, against abortion, against divorce, and above all, against euthanasia. In short, he was the Pope who inaugurated the bioethical frontier. The fourth merit of John Paul II, he bore witness to the primacy of God, the primacy of prayer, man of God, man of prayer. We could speak in this sense of a mystic, John Paul II, a mystic. This is the fourth point. Fifth, I don't know if I'll be able to cover them. Of course, I will only mention them. Fifth merit of John Paul II, reviver, promoter during the time of the post-conciliar crisis of Eucharistic fervor and devotion. Marian, the Pope of the Totus Tuus. Sixth merit, in my opinion, among those that deserve further exploration, was having opened up to ecumenism in a concrete way. Author of the encyclical Ut Unum Sint, published on the 25th of May 1995, and many significant gestures by John Paul II towards our Eastern brothers and Reformed brothers, Lutherans, etc. This, however, without ever abandoning, as we know, at least his and our Catholic identity. Seventh, penultimate, in my opinion, a merit of John Paul II was the safeguarding of the Catholic faith in the face of attacks, as his successor Benedict XVI would later do, and of liberation theologies, especially widespread in Latin America and Southeast Asia, and of relativism, religious pluralism, syncretism, and again, progressive theology. Eighth and final merit, though not the least, Peter in the world and in love with the youth. It seems to me that in this way somehow we managed to complete the multifaceted portrait of this extraordinary apostle of Mary. He was called John Paul, just needed to add Peter, and the whole picture was there, because Wojtyła had his own existence. Today we're not allowed to tell it. But for those who do not know his life, they really should, because it is clear that here we are in the presence of one of those men of providence sent by God, from time to time in the church, to save what can still be saved. I'll say straight away that John Paul II is not at all loved by the traditionalist world, which basically acts like this. Or they ignore him because they don't want trouble, as they're doing, for example, at the Gregorian or in other places, in seminaries. The fraternity of St. Peter, with Bergoglio, they pretend he does not exist to avoid the burden. And they did the same with John Paul II. Or else they attacked him. They called him names. There are traditionalist fringe groups, fanatical ones. Traditionalist fanaticism is no better than other types of fanaticism that called him the Antichrist. So we will clearly not refer to this, how shall I put it, historical insult from those traditionalist fringes who called him an Antichrist. In the same way, the progressives persecuted him because they long believed he was one of them, because of his easygoing temperament, the unconventional pope, and so on. In reality, in terms of doctrine, especially regarding doctrine itself, the doctrine as such, so the documents of the faith, John Paul II neither removed nor added anything. He simply safeguarded the faith, just as it was meant to be safeguarded, the heritage of the faith. He received the deposit of faith in 1978 and handed it over in 2005, whole, intact, and without any blunders. And then, also in terms of boundaries, in short, John Paul II fought for the defense of the faith. Non-negotiable values. Where do the traditionalists take hold? And then we move on. They cling to the idea that John Paul II, with the spirit of Assisi, as they call it, with the meeting of religions in Assisi, actually introduced, even paved the way for Bergoglio's syncretic relativism. This is a vile accusation for which the traditionalists will have to answer before God, because John Paul II never denied at all the salvific uniqueness of Jesus Christ. Perhaps the event was unfortunate in itself. We might even be somewhat willing to accept that, of course. But there is absolutely nothing heretical. In John, nothing whatsoever. A pope, steadfast in faith. He was one of those men sent by God. He lost his mother when he was little and was forced to live his early childhood, his smallness, in a dramatic situation from the very beginning. In the family, because his mother dies, his brother dies, he is left with his father, who will also die soon after. He's left alone, and then has to face Nazism first, and then communism. He sees his companions die during the roundups. I wrote it in my book. He tells it himself. The Nazis come in to arrest the seminarians, and this is nothing short of incredible. He doesn't even have time to hide, but the Nazi soldiers don't see him. It is not like that, as if God made it indissoluble, he says, and he says that when he becomes Pope, he had understood it clearly. Blessed day, children of Jesus and Mary's Sacred Hearts and St. Joseph's chaste heart. There are men who have it clear right from the start, but since God demands humility, they don't say it. But there are men in the church who have known since childhood that they are made for a mission. God enlightens her in this, and Carol, he had it always strikingly clear. This remained alive. Imagine, his fellow students were then taken to concentration camps. In fact, he would remember them all his life. While he remained unharmed, they didn't arrest him. Then, later, once he had made up his mind after reading the treatise on true devotion to Mary, because he was an excellent actor, to enter the seminary, it must be remembered that the priestly calling is the work of the Madonna in John Paul II, he says. He wouldn't make up his mind because she was there. I think there was one called Anna, who was courting him. He was probably in love with this colleague of his at the theater, too. And in any case, while reading the treatise on true devotion, while working as a laborer at Solvay, he decides to enter the seminary and has a terrible accident with a lorry that runs him over. A woman saves him at the roadside just before he was really at risk of dying. A woman comes, helps him, calls for help, takes him to hospital, holds his hand, and so on, and then this woman disappears. He never said it, but he always suspected it might have been the Virgin Mary. Totus tuus. So when he becomes a bishop, he chooses this motto, which he will take with him to Rome as Pope, and which he will spread throughout the world. I am all yours, Mary, his love for the Madonna, which would accompany him in difficult times. We specifically recall the attack in St. Peter's Square on the 13th of May 1981, when at 5:17 in the afternoon, John Paul II was due to announce the founding of the Institute on the Family. Many saw a connection in this. 𝐤𝐲 fires 3 gunshots from a firearm. The third bullet, the second one I don't remember now, is the deadly one, the lethal one. In a pool of blood, John Paul II collapses to the ground in the Pope Mobile, and he says to Stanisław, "I forgive the brother who struck me." And we know that that bullet will follow, as the professor who operates on him will say, a zigzag trajectory without. May John Paul II die. This is a particularly dramatic moment, as we all remember, and John Paul II will attribute this salvation to the Madonna with totus tuus. Salvation, he would often say. I remember when the professor used to tell us that. Father Stefano de Fioris, a Mariologist whom I followed at the Gregorian at the Pontifical Gregorian University, used to tell us that he was present when, during the in-depth investigation, some Mariologists were also summoned. He, Wojtyła, would listen to everyone. Then Matutina Lugli would place something on the table and say, "Do you want to know my interpretation?" And he would always say this exact phrase, "A hand fired, a hand saved," and he was referring to the Madonna. But this love for the Madonna, if possible in an even more tender way, returns in the end. We are in the final weeks of his life. We have in our minds the images of John Paul II during the Way of the Cross at the Colosseum, led by Ratzinger holding the crucifix, but a few days, a week earlier, he loses his voice. They perform a tracheotomy without telling him, without informing him, and he loses his voice. These are the dramatic final days of John Paul II, who writes to the doctors when he realizes he can no longer speak. He asks for a tablet and writes, "What have you done to me? But I remain always totus tuus." Let us now return to the 8 points I have developed, which I will only be able to outline unless it becomes too heavy. I hope this reflection on John Paul II will not be too burdensome. First, the Jubilee, the Church, and the Third Millennium. When the Conclave of 78 took place, in the dramatic year of the 3 popes, because Paul VI died on the 6th of August that year, Rome was suffocating in unbearable heat. The cardinals all came to Rome. I took the 𝐸𝐵. There was the conclave. And on the 26th of August, the feast of Our Lady of Częstochowa, he is elected. Albino Luciani, who assumed the name John Paul I, marked a second significant moment. On the 28th of September, unexpectedly, the death is announced of Albino Luciani himself, who had taken the name John Paul I. Thus, cardinals must return to Rome. In an atmosphere, one only needs to read the history books. Gloomy, somber, heavy, everyone senses that there's something in the air that doesn't feel right. So once again, the conclave is held, and indeed, he is elected. Karol Wojtyła for 18 years. When he is elected, we are at the first point, the Jubilee Church of the Third Millennium, before being elected. Probably because he had been informed of the possibility that the cardinals' votes might converge on him, a detail not overlooked. Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, a respected figure, the primate of the Polish Church, approached Cardinal Wojtyła with great resolve and said these words to him: Dominus ad est et te vocat, you, the Lord is calling you. He tells him that they are thinking of voting for him. It is said that John Paul II suddenly fell silent, turned pale, and then Wyszyński made this profound prophecy to Wojtyła. He would carry it with him throughout his pontificate, as he was told, the Lord is asking you to lead the Church into the Third Millennium. Welcome to Holiness and Coffee. Elected Pope in 78, amid the ongoing storm of the post-council period, which Wojtyła managed to navigate. And then he died in 2005, when for 5 years already, half a decade, the Church, with John Paul II, the helmsman of the council, had entered the new millennium. And here then the Pope of the Jubilee. We all remember the opening of the Holy Door, not the numbers. Phantasmagorical, this latest fiasco, sensational, despite what the media want people to believe. Who knows, this is the second Jubilee that's gone terribly for Bergoglio. The first one, at the beginning, the Jubilee of Mercy, was a resounding flop. There was no Rome at all for the Jubilee. And this one may point different. Instead, we remember all the numbers, but in reverse. Sensational Excesses by John Paul II for the Jubilee of 2000. When, wearing that not exactly lovely coat they put on him, that unforgivable papal master of ceremonies, Monsignor Marini, made him wear that horrible coat, in my opinion, horrible. They could certainly have chosen a more elegant one anyway on that occasion. There, John Paul II, broadcast worldwide, opened the holy door and ushered in, already limping, already suffering due to Parkinson's disease, ushered in the Church of the Third Millennium. With a direction, with a compass, the Second Vatican Council. Let us remember that. Secondly, Wojtyła collaborated. He contributed to the collapse of the communist bloc. When John Paul II is elected, the world is divided into 2 blocks, as we know, with the Soviet bloc, along with its satellite countries, centered in Moscow, and the Western capitalist bloc. For years there was genuine fear of a possible nuclear war, and indeed, without a doubt, the so-called Cold War persisted. So the election of a Polish pope, remember that Poland was under the communist regime, undoubtedly contributed to the development. Providential in God's plan, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1986, and then slowly, shortly thereafter, in 1991, the definitive collapse of the Soviet Union. You can see in the photo the eminent John Paul II at the historic meeting in Rome, in St. Peter's, in the Vatican, with Mikhail Gorbachev, leader of the Russian Politburo. He, John Paul II, meets him in Rome. This photo is important, but perhaps while I was saying that Wojtyła contributed to the fall of communism, the photo should have been shown, in my opinion, with Lech Wałęsa, the leader of Solidarity, the workers' union that in Gdańsk first and then gradually throughout Poland contributed, holding the medal of Our Lady of Stochowa, to the collapse of the Soviet system. It is no coincidence that the question, the doubt about who ordered the attack in St. Peter's Square still remains unresolved. Well, probably point 3 or never. At least we won't know. Perhaps future generations will. It was the Grey Wolves, the ones from the secret services, Bulgarians, the Bulgarian lead. They say it was the Soviet Che Guevara who wanted to eliminate Wojtyła in '81, actually from Via. Shortly after, the entire Soviet system collapsed, the giant with feet of clay. Or they say it was the Freemasons, no one knows, or maybe all of them together. In any case, they didn't manage to eliminate him. Wojtyła, and he was a man of great faith. I want to tell you, because I remember when I was studying at the Gregorian, and then later on as well. In the studies on Wojtyła, there are also Christian authors, I mean Catholic ones like Andrea Riccardi, who in my opinion miss, or perhaps are too reserved to say, the real way in which Wojtyła approached the socio-political, geopolitical question, because he was a strategist. Without a doubt, although it has only recently come to light, Lech Wałęsa, the leader, said that the real reason that pushed Wojtyła to take an interest in geopolitical dynamics, rather like what I try to do when I speak to you about world situations, was not that he approached it as a politician, as a geopolitical strategist, but as a man of God, of prayer. That is, Wojtyła had a gaze of faith. He knew and understood. Do you remember his trips to Paul? When he went several times to Poland during the Soviet regime with the intent to proclaim that Poland is the homeland of Mary, a homeland where Christian values that have withstood the test of time cannot be supplanted. It was a profound and inspiring vision of faith that John Paul II so eloquently brought to bear on the Russian question and on the daunting challenge presented by the communist bloc. Anyway, with John Paul II, he gives it a shove, and it's the decisive one. Allow me to say no, because in my opinion, he does give the decisive push. And unfortunately, history is like that, in the sense that sometimes other heroes are forgotten. And surely John Paul II is winking at me from heaven and saying that you're absolutely right, that the real credit for the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Soviet system is due to the sacrifice of a single person, within whom, of course, lies the sacrifice of many others. I'm talking about the martyred priest, Polish Jerzy Popieluszko, barbarically killed by the Soviet police in Warsaw. He who had gathered hundreds of thousands of people with a movement alongside Solidarność for the liberation of Poland. His martyrdom, without a doubt, contributed to a Polish resurgence, which was then, of course, carried forward by Wojtyła. Third merit, champion of non-negotiable values. John Paul II said that he would always stand up whenever he had to defend life. Over the years, he founded the Institute for the Family, which the Bergoglians, the partisans of Satan, have now turned into a sort of enclave for spreading relativism, moral as well as doctrinal. But John Paul II was the Pope of the family. When he saw that the family was under attack, that he had been warned in advance about the intention to introduce new, since this is now widespread, new models of family, extended family, different family, no longer a natural family, John Paul II fought, and he even burned his chance at the Nobel Prize. Because around the time, just before the year 2000, there was real talk, I remember it very well, even major newspapers. International newspapers were loudly announcing that John Paul II would receive the Nobel Prize. They did not give it to him because he raised his voice in defense of non-negotiable values, particularly the family and life. then we know, behind the scenes, how Sister Lucia becomes part of John Paul's life, as do other figures. Sister Lucia would say that Satan would play his final cards against the family and against life. And John Paul II, when Mother Teresa, already elderly, wanted to laugh. You see these other figures revolving around John Paul II, Mother Teresa, Sister Lucia, and Mother Teresa, elderly, with heart problems, quite tired, says to the Pope, "Give me your obedience, your holiness, so that I may laugh again." The Pope says to her, "You must allow yourself to be spent, Mother, going around the world. My obedience is that you cry out in defense of life." And it's true, because Mother Teresa, who had not made this subject a central theme, at the request of the now elderly John Paul II, goes around the world, Mother Teresa, and changes her approach. She does speak, yes, always about God's love, about caring for the poor, but now she always includes the theme of life, in particular the fight against abortion, right up to the end of her days. Blessed day, children of Jesus and Mary's Sacred Hearts and St. Joseph's Chaste Heart. The Magisterium, luminous. Then one sees Bergoglio, and one wonders how those poor souls in Cuba have managed to remain in communion with that guy for 12 years. 𝐸𝐵 𝐃𝐨𝐻𝐿 comes to mind. We've mentioned it several times. In fact, I had it in my bag. I had brought it with me, the 𝐸𝐵 We did a couple of catecheses on it. I believe it was Father Enrico in the window on the Magisterium of the Family, and Brother Celestino in the window on the Ten Commandments. I presume that sooner or later they will inevitably refer to this encyclical, because it defends the family, defends life. It is the ethical, moral code of the Ten Commandments. 𝐸𝐵 𝐃𝐨𝐻𝐿 is an encyclical that enters into history, clear, vivid, in defense of life, in defense of the child in the face of abortion. And then the family, John Paul II defended the family. Fourth point, and he had the courage to bypass it, because John Paul II reiterated here that the Church can never allow communion for the divorced and remarried who live in a conjugal relationship that is as husband and wife. These people can receive spiritual communion, but they cannot approach the Eucharist. And Bergoglio was capable of bearing it. John Paul II and Benedict XVI lived unnoticed. But now I'm at the fourth point, because it's already 10 o'clock, so I'll only be able to announce the primacy of God, Wojtyła, as a mystic, the primacy of God. This might be the core to start from. I placed it as the fourth point, but I didn't rank it by importance. If you knew how I prepare the catecheses, you'd understand in no time. Maybe the hierarchy needs to be revised. Perhaps I had put this one first, but I actually placed it fourth. Gradually, I was choosing the primacy of God. Karol Wojtyła is someone who immerses himself in God. He did not pray, he had become prayer. Prayer was, as it is for many of us, must be for all of us, breath, strength. He had great stamina and rhythm. Paul II. He slept little, ate only what was essential. Physically, the only illness that truly disabled him was Parkinson's disease. God makes them that way. He brought it all to completion in the end. To others, he gives little by little and keeps them going with that illness for their whole life. They live a long time, but they carry that disease with them. The Lord says they distribute. To others, to the athletic pope who used to swim, who went skiing, how wonderful, toned, how do you say? Toned, attractive, athletic. In the end, God, on the eve of the 1990s, right at the threshold of the Jubilee, which I placed as the first key moment because that was his mission, to lead the Church into the Jubilee of the third millennium, he falls ill with Parkinson's disease, devastating for a pope. A communicative pope like him can no longer smile. The muscles in his face stiffen, he dries up. When they tell him, dry yourself, Navarro Valls says, Your Holiness, perhaps you can no longer appear publicly. Did Jesus not reveal himself on the cross? She wipes away saliva as it dribbles because she can't feel it, while Wojtyła wipes himself on the other side. So I cried, because I saw the strength of this man who so profoundly touched me, deeply. I feel Wojtyła living within me in many things, dear children. How could one ever give up? When he was wiping his face, she was salivating on the other side in front of millions of people. And when he was limping, I served Mass for him in Palermo, at the stadium in Palermo. I was granted the grace, together with another seminarian, to enter the sacristy alone, just the two of us. While he was vesting for Mass, there was silence. Oh my goodness, dear children, how can one forget certain things when meeting men of God? When he went in, he was shuffling his feet. He wasn't walking anymore. It was 94, I think, or 95. He couldn't walk properly anymore. He was just shuffling his feet. You could see he was really struggling. When he got dressed, he was immersed in God, as they used to say about Don Bosco, surrounded by millions of people. He was immersed in God, in prayer, in the primacy of God. John Paul II would become deeply absorbed in prayer. And we also have this remarkable testimony of a man who was seeking God, and therefore undoubtedly a mystic. Fifth point, Eucharistic revival and Marian devotion. And here there's not much we need to say, we know. We have spoken before about his love for the tabernacle, but 2 episodes alone speak volumes, actually 3. The first, Sister Tobiana, only after her death, will reveal that she had followed Wojtyła since she was young. He became a bishop at 38 years old, and already, quietly, Sister Tobiana was there, quite a bit younger. I don't know how many years younger, but she would see him on the ground, though she never said it, on his knees, the bishop, and then the cardinal, and later even the Pope on the ground, with his arms in the shape of a cross in front of the tabernacle, adoring Jesus. He made his major decisions there. Second episode, during the apostolic journeys he made around the world, John Paul II, when his entourage returned, exhausted because of jet lag and all that. There, he would go into the chapel and wouldn't come out again, to the point that they had to lock it with a key. They would say, "Your Holiness, this evening the chapel is unavailable," because afterwards he needed to retire to his room. Here, devotion to Mary. And the third point, when in the last Corpus Domini procession, both Secretary Stanislao and Monsignor Maria implore him, "Holy Father, here is the kneeler, because you asked for it. Do not kneel, Your Holiness, because..." He had worn away the cartilage in his knees from kneeling so much. And yet when they display His Holiness, the one who had done that, he kneels down. And then Marian devotion, love for the Rosary. There's no need to add anything more to the Pope of the Totus Tuus. Sixth point, ecumenism, open to dialogue with our Orthodox brothers. He made important gestures, including the forgotten encyclical Ut Unum Sint, published on the occasion of, that is, it was published to initiate this dialogue. Even more intense with the Orthodox brothers and with the brothers of the Lutheran Reformation, and more generally with the brothers of the Reformed churches. I invite the confrere to revisit that encyclical. Where does ecumenism stand? They talk about a progressive Pope Francis and so on, but ecumenism is dead. Bergoglio has never given a damn about ecumenism. And it's interesting, break time point 37, because with Bergoglio, you have to do the opposite. Let me explain what I mean. Many traditionalists criticize Wojtyła for this ecumenical openness, which Benedict also carried forward. The fact that Bergoglio boycotted it, ecumenism, that he blatantly boycotted it, apart from that forced meeting with Kirill in Cuba, in Havana, in past years, other than that, there's nothing. There is no ecumenical movement like the one Wittenberg had. So the fact that Bergoglio is boycotting him means that God wants it. I don't know if I can say it, that ecumenism, God has something in mind. Because when one speaks, for example, out of charity, I refer to the great prelate, Pope John, the last pope. It is said that he will bring unity. God wants unity. Jesus said so that they may all be one. Bergoglio does not want it. He enjoys division. The devil is the one who divides. Bergoglio has done very little, almost nothing. In fact, I don't have the time, unlike John Paul II. He strongly believed in this identity of fraternity and was then willing to reconsider everything. Seventh and final point, I've concluded the seventh point, the safeguarding of doctrine. It is an apparently irrelevant aspect, The penultimate one is an apparently irrelevant aspect because it is not emphasized. In reality, over the 26 years of the pontificate with John Paul II, the doctrine was strengthened. The official one, not the one of opinion leaders like Lance Cook or Gutierrez or Leonardo Boff or Walter Casper. No, I mean the doctrine, the official doctrine of the Church. With John Paul II, there's not the slightest deviation from doctrine, none at all. None. The traditionalists' arguments are mere pretexts. I mean the spirit of Assisi, syncretism. No, John Paul II, in his Christmas greetings to the Roman Curia in 1986, after having held the meeting in Assisi in October, clarified that Jesus Christ is the only Savior. We never meant to question that. But he really did defend the doctrine. And what is the acid test? I don't know if any of you in here are thinking about it. The litmus test that Wojtyła held dear, though many say otherwise, but they're wrong. He cared deeply about doctrine and about calling to Rome a German cardinal whose name was Joseph Ratzinger. In 1980 to 1981, John Paul II called him to Rome. From that moment, Ratzinger became John Paul II's key aide, cementing trust and influence throughout his papacy. The two meet frequently and then launch a full-scale magisterial battle against liberation theologies. The final point is that Ratzinger is a pilgrim in the world and a friend to the young. The statistical data on John Paul II's apostolic journeys with young people are impressive. During his pontificate, John Paul II traveled more than all his predecessors, including Pope Ratzinger as well, Benedict. While some of the destinations of his pilgrimages, such as the United States or the Holy Land, had already been visited by his predecessor Paul VI, many other countries had never before been visited by any pope, and the crowds were always overwhelming. A vast number of pastoral visits also took place in the parishes of Rome, in cities, in sanctuaries, and in workplaces throughout Italy. He was the first pope to travel to the United Kingdom, where he met Queen Elizabeth II, the head of the Anglican Church. On the occasion of his many journeys, he highlighted his devotion to the Virgin Mary by visiting numerous sanctuaries dedicated to her, such as those in Knock in Ireland, Fatima in Portugal, Guadalupe in Ratzinger, Lourdes in Francesco, Loreto in Italy, and Pompeii in Italy. From the 25th of January to the 1st of February 1979, John Paul II undertook his first apostolic journey. So his first apostolic journey took place between January and February, visiting the Dominican Republic, the Ratzinger Bahamas, Santo Domingo, the city of Ratzinger Puebla, Oaxaca, Guadalajara, Monterrey, and Nassau, presiding over 7 masses and delivering 36 public speeches. In the same year, he undertook his second apostolic journey, the first to his homeland. As Pope, he celebrated 12 masses and delivered 37 public speeches. There he visits Warsaw, Gniezno, Częstochowa, Kraków, Kalwaria, Wadowice, Brzezinka, and Nowy Targ. In the same year, from the 29th of September to the 8th of October 1979, he undertook his third apostolic journey to Ireland, the United States of America, and the United Nations. The cities visited were Dublin, Drogheda, Galway, Knock, Limerick, Maynooth, Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Des Moines, Chicago, Washington. He celebrated 13 masses and delivered 75 public speeches. Still in 1979, a final journey to Turkey took place from the 28th to the 30th of November. He visited Ankara, Istanbul, Ephesus, and Smyrna, delivering 2 masses and 13 public speeches. He is the first pope to visit Puerto Rico, and he has also traveled to Colombia, to Bolivia, visiting many countries, with his list of journeys being endless. We all remember the last apostolic journey of John Paul II. Maybe someone remembers it. The last significant apostolic journey of John Paul II was to Lourdes from the 14th of August to the 15th of August. 2 days, a pope still able to move, bent forward in his wheelchair, and he carries them out. The farewell from the planet is the Pope of the young. Finally, World Youth Days. World Youth Day is an international spiritual gathering invented by that genius of Mary, John Paul II. These World Youth Days were originally established break time point between 1983 and 1984. John Paul II had arranged to meet in Rome on the occasion of the Holy Year of Redemption for Palm Sunday. 300,000 young people from all over the world showed up. On that occasion, John Paul II handed a wooden cross to the young people to symbolize Jesus' love for humanity, and as a proclamation that only in Christ, who died and rose again, there is salvation and redemption. So the first edition takes place in Rome on the 23rd of March, 1986. The other meetings take place in 1987 in Buenos Aires on the 11th and 12th of April of 1987. The same. Approximately 900,000 people joined World Youth Day in Buenos Aires, uniting thousands of young people. The second World Day takes place in Santiago de Compostela in Spain in 1989. The meeting, they were incredibly well attended. The next World Youth Day is in Częstochowa in Poland at the Marian Sanctuary of the Black Madonna, where the effects of the Iron Curtain were still visible, with about 1.5 million faithful. In Denver, in the United States in 1993, and in Manila in 1995, where a historic record was reached, 5 million people. They attended the Mass according to estimates, but some say even more. And then let's remember the brave one in Paris, while everyone said, "Don't bother, no holiness there." Yet we did it and saw the result. In 1997, the famous unforgettable World Youth Day in Rome, and in 2000 at Tor Vergata with Pope Bosco. Jesus Christ, You Are My Life in Toronto, in Canada in 2002, the last World Youth Day, presided over by John Paul II, already very ill. So I've tried to briefly sum up the staggering figures of what we've called Break Time Live today. John Paul II, Magnus the Great. I would like to conclude this thoughtful and extensive catechesis in heartfelt homage to our unforgettable John Paul II by sharing the final words he imparted before his passing. He is on his deathbed, hooked up to all the machines keeping him alive, and with his eyes, because he can no longer speak, he looks around. There are cardinals, bishops, the entire pontifical court close to him. But he's searching with his eyes for Sister Tobiana, who had been following him all his life. He realizes that the Pope needs one last appeal, one last help. And so Sister Tobiana approaches. The cardinals, Monsignor Stanislaw himself, step back out of delicacy. Sister Tobiana goes over to the dying Pope and kneels down, takes his hand. John Paul II looks at her. Now, it's not official, but it seems he shed a tear, though it's not official. He looks at her and speaks his final words to Sister Tobiana. Go to the house of the Father. To die like this? Let me go to the house of the Father. You can imagine how one might have felt. Sister Tobiana, however, does not cry because she must carry it through to the end. He rises to the task with extraordinary courage, taking on the responsibility of telling the medical team, pull the plug. Pull the plug. The doctors look at each other, though Sotto Bianco, they'll also recount some gossip, and that Comastri was there. Apparently Ratzinger was also there, but he wasn't present at the moment of death. Razzi, who leaves shortly before, and says it in black and white. Such a decision, made with such certainty, that the doctors have no doubt. It was truly God who wanted it that way. So the doctors obey Sister Tobiana. He doesn't need to repeat it a second time, because after saying it, he returns to support John Paul II in the final stage. And so he goes bare. He doesn't need to check whether he does it because he said it with such conviction, pull the plug, that there was no need to insist. And so the plug is pulled. You know how it goes. It depends on how serious the patient's condition is. Sometimes it's just a matter of a few seconds. In any case, a couple of minutes. And then the patient dies, the plug is pulled, and those present say it all felt so surreal because it seemed like he would never die. Maria's giant, Sister Tobiana herself, was there, still hoping that what she knew was about to happen would not actually happen. You could only hear the machine and the nuns, because Sor Tobiana wasn't the only one there. He was accompanied by a couple of nuns. Sister Tobiana was the one who personally looked after him. Everyone in the papal room hears the machine going beep, beep, beep. John Paul II has the death rattle. Look, they recount one last time, quickly, those present, and then he looks at Sister Tobiana and closes his eyes. He breathes his last, holding Sister Tobiana's hand and gently tilting his head. It was 21:37. Well, imagine that, after 20 years, on the 2nd of April, 2005. A giant was leaving us, who was waiting for us in paradise. I know I'll find him among the friends at Heaven's Gate. He couldn't not be there. He wouldn't do me this wrong, John Paul II. When I go there, he will show up. Well then, dears, so it is now possible to call in by phone by dialing the telephone number of Radio Domina. For this or for other things, I remind you that this afternoon at 6:30 we have the Rosary in remembrance of John Paul II, and then at 9 o'clock, the unmissable catechesis by Don Enrico, the unforgettable magisterium. Let's hope it's unforgettable too. What emotion can do. Unforgettable, unmissable catechesis by Don Enrico. Look at that beautiful smile Don Enrico has there, the magisterium on the family.
Indimenticabile catechesi di ho detto di no indimenticabile l'imperdibile catechesi di Don Enrico. Guardate che bel sorriso che c'ha lì Don Enrico, il magistero sulla famiglia.